Hello and welcome to another episode of the DigiTeacher Digest. This week I'd like to start looking at some of the cognitive tools that we have available as teachers to use in the classroom. Now, thinking skills have been around for an awfully long time. I don't think we should pretend that this is anything new in education. After all, one of the main goals of education is to teach students to think. But they have become something of an industry. And you find a plethora of tools available now. Bono's thinking hats, the thinking maps, the thinker's keys, the Harvard visible thinking routines, etc., etc., etc. So I'd like to explore some of these tools, and I'm going to start with Bono's thinking hats, have a look at that, have a look at some of the ways that I've used them in the classroom, and I'd love to hear how you've used them in the classroom too. So a quick caveat, I'm not a Bono thinking hats trainer. So what I'm saying represents my understanding of this. So there are 6 hats, and you put them on in turn to represent different modalities, different ways of thinking. So the red hat represents your emotions, how you feel about something, your gut. The white hat represents data and facts. The yellow hat and the black hat represents the positive benefits, the pros, and the cautions, difficulties, weaknesses, the cons. The green hat, alternative ways, creative ways of thinking about something. And the blue hat manages the process. It's the metacognitive hat. So very often would begin and end a meeting, decide what order, what hats you're going to be using, because you don't have to use them all. And then at the end of the meeting, decide what to take out of that meeting, to extract information out of it. The Bono thinking hats represent something that he calls parallel thinking. So the whole idea here is that a group of people, because it's an example of collaborative thinking, will think through one particular aspect of any issue, taking each aspect in turn, your emotional responses, the facts, the pros, the cons, lateral thinking around the issue, and so on. So you won't necessarily have a freewheeling meeting where people are just, whatever idea comes to mind, discussing. What you're having is very focused meetings where you are looking at particular aspects of a problem. And this is its strength. This is what the tool is supposed to do. So parallel thinking is the kind of process that this tool promotes, affords. And I think it's very useful in those terms. Not every hat need be used for every issue. So you might only look at the strengths or weaknesses of something. You might not be looking for creative solutions, for example. You might not be using the emotive hat. On another occasion, maybe it's a very emotional issue and you want to spend more time with that. Generally speaking, it's recommended not to spend much time on the red hat. You don't want a meeting to be dominated by emotions. You want to be looking at it more factually and breaking it down. So in any meeting, when you put on the blue hat, so in classroom, for example, I might have a series of hats. I'm putting on the blue hat at the moment, which means we're thinking metacognitively. So we decide what order, what hats we're going to use, because you don't have to use them all the time. And you decide what order you get and what amount of time you're going to spend on each. So we might decide not to spend much time on the red hat, but to give it a minute maybe for everyone to just very quickly give their emotive responses. And then we might take out the white hat and look at the facts of the matter. And then we might look at the pros, the yellow hat, and the cons, the black hat. And then we might sum it up. You can also, with the metacognitive hat again, and you can go through several iterations of this. So the first iteration might be for throwing out ideas. Everyone just chips in and you write down whatever anyone says, wearing each hat in turn. And then the second pass might be to make a bit more order out of that. So again, you look at each feature, you look at each aspect, white hat, you put on the green hat, whatever it is, and you work through that. But this time you are pulling out what you want to take out of the brainstorming that you did previously. And then usually you'll want some kind of summary process at the end to decide what you're going to do about all of that information. And that will normally involve the blue hat. So that's a kind of rough guide to the overall process. So here's an example of what I used it for in English literature. So with a grade 8 class, and we're studying John Steinbeck's The Pearl, and the skill that I'm trying to teach them is character analysis. So I've broken the class into different groups, and each group is looking at a different character. So this particular group is looking at Kino, and I've given them a Google Doc, and I've kind of scaffolded the task using the Bono's thinking hats. So the overall style, you might recognize, it looks a bit like the Cornell note-taking strategy, and that was quite conscious. So what I'm asking the group to do is, first of all, think about their feelings towards Kino. Do they like him as a character? Is he a nice guy? So red hat. What do they know about Kino? Basically factual, white hat. What are his strengths, yellow hat, and what are his weaknesses? And then asking them in a summary to put that together in what is essentially a character sketch. So I'm using the hats to kind of scaffold their thinking. So here's an example that's the Google Doc that's been filled out by a particular group, just so that you get some idea of how this particular exercise worked. And what I noted was that the hats very much helped to scaffold the final character sketch. So if I just set the group, do a character sketch of Kino, I doubt very much whether I would have gotten quite as much insight. The hats very much forced them to think about what do they know about Kino, what are his strengths, what are his weaknesses, and then when you put that together, you're more likely to produce an insightful character sketch. So I was very happy with this product and the scaffolding that the thinking hats provided. Also in English, I've used the thinking hats to scaffold writing activities, an argumentative essay, for example. So, for scaffolding, not for actually constructing the essay. It's not that you're using a hat for each paragraph, but it's to collect your thoughts. So, for example, you might have, putting on the white hat, what are the facts that you want to bring up in your essay? You put on the yellow hat, what are the pros of a particular argument, what are the cons? And then in the metacognitive hat, you might think about what is your thesis statement and what is your conclusion. And you might put on the red hat for, more emotive response. And once you've made your points, so it's useful to think about each in turn, gather data, gather points for your essay, and then go away and find a way of constructing your essay around that. I don't think it would work very well if you're just equating this hat for this paragraph, that hat for the other paragraph. I don't think that would work very well at all. But for gathering your thoughts, for scaffolding your thinking, I certainly think it works. And what I did was I got a grade 10 group in the academy to have in groups, each pick a topic, go through that, similar to the previous example, to scaffold their thinking, and then go away and write essays on that. Results were very, very mixed. I wouldn't say that this is the best method I've ever come across for teaching writing, but I think it's certainly an approach which could work, and I think needs some thought and fine-tuning. So one of the issues that we brought up as a staff was there a need for an ethical thinking hat? Because when we looked at the 6 thinking hats, we saw ethics as being something that was somewhat, we thought that was somewhat lacking. So we actually asked the Bono organization, and they said, well, that's covered by metacognitive hat. So obviously this is something that we have used locally. It's not something which is sanctioned by the Bono organization, but I think it has its place, that there are times when you need to think about ethics specifically. And it's not just about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and the factual basis of a matter or anything like that. It's about setting ethical frameworks for your thinking. And so this is something that I've used in the classroom quite a lot as well, giving space and time for students to think specifically about ethical frameworks. So I've set out a few uses of the thinking hats to scaffold thinking that I think have worked well for me, and you might well have found other instances. I know that our biology teachers, for example, have used it quite extensively, and in many subjects it is very useful to scaffold thinking. As a computer science teacher, I've never found a use for it in computer science. So I've used it in English, but not in computer science. And I think this raises a general point. Not every thinking tool is useful in every circumstance. So I think one of the main aims in any cognitive education program broadly is to give students and teaching staff a cognitive toolkit, if you like, tools that you can draw on and use when appropriate in different circumstances. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, share, and please hit that notification bell so that you never miss an episode again.